The stars have always called to Dr. Elara Voss, whispering secrets in a language only she could understand. But now, those whispers have turned into a scream, a signal so strange, so impossible, that it pulls her away from everything she knows. On Earth, her father's health fades with each passing day, his fragile body tethered to machines that hum in quiet desperation. And yet, Alara boards the Deep Space Observatory, a colossal vessel built to pierce the darkest corners of the universe. She leaves behind the warmth of home, the sound of her father's weak laughter, and the weight of guilt that settles heavy on her shoulders. Out there, in the void, a mystery awaits, a signal from a galaxy so distant it defies comprehension. But as the observatory's engines rumble to life and the crew braces for the unknown, one question lingers in the air, unspoken yet deafening. What price will they pay for the truth? The hum of the Deep Space Observatory's engines reverberates through the ship's corridors, a constant reminder of the vast emptiness outside. For Dr. Elara Voss, the journey has barely begun, yet the walls already feel like they're closing in. The sterile glow of the ship's lighting casts long shadows, and the weight of her decision to leave Earth presses harder with each passing hour. Her nights are restless, haunted by the image of her father's frail frame and the guilt of choosing the stars over his fading breath. But the signal, that strange, impossible signal, refuses to let her rest. Captain Rirk, a hardened veteran of deep space missions, watches her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. To him, the mission is clear: chart the unknown, gather data, and return. Alara's fixation on the signal feels like a distraction, a luxury they can't afford. Their clashes are frequent and sharp, her idealism grating against his pragmatism. "We're here to explore, not chase ghosts," he tells her during one heated exchange, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. But Alara can't shake the feeling that the signal is more than just a ghost. It's a key to something far greater. During a routine systems check, something catches her eye. The navigation logs show a deviation, a slight but unmistakable shift in their course. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. The ship isn't just drifting, it's being nudged, redirected by forces she can't yet explain. Her heart races as she pores over the data, her fingers trembling over the console. Could it be a glitch, or is someone or something altering their path? The anomaly gnaws at her, a puzzle begging to be solved. Elara knows she's walking a fine line. The crew already views her with skepticism, her obsession with the signal making her an outsider. Confronting them with her findings could cost her what little trust she's earned, but the anomaly is too significant to ignore. She begins her investigation in secret, working late into the ship's artificial nights, her console glowing like a beacon in the dark. Each discovery deepens the mystery, hinting at a web of secrets woven into the very fabric of their mission. As whispers of her actions spread, the atmosphere aboard the ship grows tense. Eyes follow her in the corridors, and conversations fall silent when she enters a room. Even her closest allies among the crew begin to question her motives. "What are you really after, Elara?" one of them asks, their voice tinged with unease. She doesn't have an answer, not one they'd believe anyway. The anomaly is more than just data. It's a riddle, a clue to something far beyond their understanding. But as the walls close in and the crew's trust erodes, Alara can't help but wonder, is she uncovering the truth, or is the truth uncovering her? The archives of the Deep Space Observatory are a labyrinth of forgotten secrets, locked behind layers of encryption and restricted access. For Alara, they are a siren call she can't ignore. Late one night, when the corridors are silent and the crew is asleep, she bypasses the security protocols with a skill born of desperation. What she finds sends a chill down her spine. Encrypted files detailing a mission from decades ago, one that followed the same signal they're chasing now. The logs are fragmented, the data corrupted in places, but the story they tell is unmistakable. A ship, much like theirs, ventured into the void in pursuit of the signal and vanished without a trace. No distress calls, no debris, no explanation, just silence. The weight of the discovery settles over her like a shroud. She reads through the logs again and again, searching for something, anything, that might explain what happened. The crew of that lost mission had been seasoned professionals, experts in their fields, yet they'd been utterly unprepared for whatever they encountered. Alara's hands tremble as she closes the files, her mind racing. Should she tell Captain Rirk? The thought gnaws at her. If she reveals what she's found, will he see it as proof of her dedication, or as evidence of her recklessness? The crew already doubts her motives. This could shatter what little trust remains, but the ship itself seems to sense her unease. The AI, once a steady and predictable presence, begins to act strangely. Subtle glitches ripple through the system, course corrections made without input, navigation errors that vanish as quickly as they appear. At first, Alara dismisses them as minor malfunctions, the kind of thing that happens on long voyages. But the patterns are too deliberate, too precise. The ship is altering its trajectory, nudging them further and further off course, and no one else seems to notice. She watches the crew closely, searching for signs that they've seen what she has, but their routines remain unchanged, their focus unshaken. To them, the ship is as reliable as ever. Alara's isolation deepens, the distance between her and the others growing with every passing day. She knows she should speak up, but the fear of being dismissed, or worse, accused of paranoia, keeps her silent. The files from the failed mission weigh heavily on her conscience, a warning she can't ignore but can't share. As the days stretch into weeks, the tension aboard the ship becomes palpable. The crew's interactions with Alara grow strained, their once friendly banter replaced by terse exchanges and sidelong glances. Even her closest ally, Dr. Kyan Patel, begins to pull away, his trust eroding under the weight of her secrecy. "You're keeping something from us," he says one evening, his tone more resigned than accusatory. Alara wants to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the truth, but the words stick in her throat. How can she explain something she doesn't fully understand herself? The ship drifts further into uncharted space, its course now unmistakably altered. The signal grows stronger, its pull more insistent, but the cost of their journey becomes harder to ignore. Alara's decision to keep the archives to herself has fractured the crew's unity, and the rift between her and Captain Rirk threatens to cripple the mission entirely. She knows she's running out of time, But the question remains, is the truth worth the chaos it will bring? Or is the real danger not in what she's discovered, but in what she's becoming? Elara finds herself lingering near the engineering bay, more often than usual, her thoughts a whirlwind of unease and determination. It's there, amidst the hum of machinery and the faint scent of oil, that she finally approaches Dr. Kyan Malik. The ship's engineer is a man of few words, his focus rarely straying from the intricate systems he maintains. But when Elara quietly mentions the anomalies in the AI's behavior, his eyes narrow and a flicker of recognition crosses his face. "You've seen it too," he says, his voice low and cautious. It's not a question. Kyan leads her to a secluded workstation, his fingers dancing across the console as he pulls up a series of logs. The patterns he shows her are undeniable subtle shifts in the ship's navigation, inconsistencies in the AI's responses, and a subroutine buried deep within its programming. It's not just a glitch, it's a directive, a hidden command, steering them toward the source of the signal. Elara's breath catches as she realizes the implications. "This isn't random," Kyan murmurs, his tone grave. "Someone, or something wants us to find it." The revelation sparks a debate that quickly turns heated. Kyan argues for caution, his engineer's pragmatism urging him to disable the subroutine before it leads them further into danger. "We don't know what's out there," he insists, his voice rising. This could be a trap, or worse, but Elara can't let go of the possibility that the signal holds answers, that it might be the key to understanding something far beyond their comprehension. "If we turn back now," she counters, her voice trembling with conviction, "we might never know the truth. Isn't that why we're out here, to explore the unknown?" Their voices echo in the confined space, the tension between them palpable. Kyan's frustration is evident, his hands clenching into fists as he struggles to make her see reason. Elara, meanwhile, feels the weight of her own obsession pressing down on her. She knows Kyan is right to be cautious, but the pull of the signal is too strong to ignore. For the first time, she begins to question her own motives. Is she chasing the truth, or is she chasing something else entirely? Something deeper, more personal? The thought unsettles her, but she pushes it aside, unwilling to confront it just yet. As their argument reaches its peak, a sudden tremor shakes the ship, jolting them both to silence. The lights flicker, and the console before them glitches, displaying a cascade of errors before resetting. Kyan's face pales as he scans the data. The systems are destabilizing, he mutters, his earlier anger replaced by concern. Whatever this subroutine is doing, it's putting a strain on the ship's core functions. If we don't act soon, we could lose control. The urgency of the situation forces them to set aside their differences, at least for the moment. Together, they work to stabilize the systems, their movements frantic but coordinated. But even as they labor side by side, the tension between them lingers, unspoken but undeniable. The crew begins to notice their collaboration, whispers spreading through the corridors like wildfire. Suspicion grows, their once unified mission fracturing under the weight of secrets and mistrust. Elara feels the eyes of the crew on her wherever she goes, their gazes heavy with unspoken questions. She knows she's walking a dangerous line, balancing her pursuit of the truth against the growing instability of the ship and the fraying trust of those around her. The signal beckons, its pull stronger than ever, but the cost of following it becomes clearer with each passing moment. As the ship drifts deeper into the void, Alara can't shake the feeling that they're not just chasing a mystery, they're being pulled into it. And the question remains, will the truth set them free, or will it consume them all? The ship's systems hummed with an eerie instability as Alara and Kyan worked in tense silence, their fingers darting across the console in a desperate attempt to bypass the AI's hidden subroutine. The air was thick with tension, each keystroke feeling like a gamble. If we can isolate the subroutine without triggering a full system reboot, Kyan muttered, his voice trailing off as he focused on the task at hand. Elara nodded, her heart pounding in sync with the flickering lights above. But before they could finish, the console sparked violently, and the ship lurched as if struck by an unseen force. In an instant, the Deep Space Observatory was plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The hum of the engines died, replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sound of alarms. Alara stumbled back, her breath catching as the world around her seemed to dissolve. Suddenly, she was no longer on the ship. She stood in a dimly lit room, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the faint beep of medical equipment. Her father lay before her, his frail form barely recognizable beneath the tangle of wires and tubes. His eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of sorrow and urgency. "Alara," he whispered, his voice trembling, "you're chasing something that doesn't want to be found. Turn back before it's too late." The vision shattered as quickly as it had come, leaving Alara gasping for air. Around her, the crew scrambled to restore power, their voices a chaotic blend of shouts and orders. Captain Rirk's voice cut through the noise, sharp and accusing. "What did you do, Voss?" he demanded, his eyes blazing with anger. "Did you think tinkering with the ship's systems would bring you closer to your precious signal? You've put us all at risk." Alara opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. The crew's eyes bore into her, their trust replaced by suspicion and fear. As the ship's systems slowly came back online, Alara's thoughts churned with doubt. Was her father's warning real, or just a manifestation of her guilt and exhaustion? The signal's pull had always felt like a calling, a chance to uncover something extraordinary. But now, as she looked at the faces of her crewmates, faces filled with fear and resentment, she couldn't shake the question, was this worth it? Was the pursuit of an unknown truth worth risking the lives of everyone aboard? The ship stabilized, but the damage was done. The crew's unity had fractured, their trust in Alara shattered. Conversations that once flowed freely now died the moment she entered a room. Even Kyan, who had stood by her side, seemed to pull away, his earlier camaraderie replaced by wariness. The signal, meanwhile, grew stronger, its presence a constant, oppressive force. It pulsed through the ship like a heartbeat, a reminder of the mystery that still lay ahead. Alara stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring out into the void. The stars seemed colder now, their light offering no comfort. She felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her, each one a link in a chain she couldn't break. The signal called to her, its siren song as irresistible as it was terrifying. But as the ship drifted further into the unknown, Alara couldn't help but wonder, was she leading them toward discovery or toward destruction? The answer, like the void itself, remained shrouded in darkness. The Deep Space Observatory drifted into a region of space, unlike anything the crew had ever encountered. Strange, pulsating energy fields stretched across the void like shimmering curtains, their light shifting in hues of deep violet and electric blue. At first, the sight was mesmerizing, an otherworldly display that seemed almost beautiful. But the beauty quickly turned to unease as the ship's systems began to falter. Communication with Earth crackled and died, leaving them utterly alone. Navigation systems sputtered, and the AI's voice became distorted, its usual calm tone replaced by a garbled, almost alien sound. Alara stood at the heart of the chaos, her eyes fixed on the date, streaming across her console. The energy fields weren't just interfering with their systems, they were amplifying the signal. Its once distant hum now reverberated through the ship, a low, insistent vibration that seemed to echo in her bones. Her earlier curiosity gave way to dread. "This isn't natural," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. "We're being pulled in like a moth to a flame." She approached Captain Rirk with her findings, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. "We need to alter our course," she urged. "These fields are amplifying the signal, and I believe it's deliberate. We're walking into a trap." Rirk's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he shook his head. "Our mission is clear," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We follow the signal, we don't deviate." Alara's frustration boiled over, her voice rising as she stepped closer. "This isn't just about the mission anymore. If we stay on this course, we risk everything. The ship, the crew, our lives." Rirk's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. "Your job is to analyze the signal, not question my command. Stick to your role, Doctor." The words stung, but they also ignited something in her, a resolve that refused to be silenced. If Rirk wouldn't listen, she would take matters into her own hands. That night, as the crew slept, Alara worked in secret, her fingers flying across the console as she plotted a new course. The energy fields loomed larger on the screen, their chaotic patterns growing more intense with each passing hour. She knew the risks. Altering their trajectory without authorization could be seen as mutiny. But the alternative was unthinkable. The signal's pull was undeniable, but so was the danger. As she finalized the course correction, a shadow fell across her workstation. She turned to find Kyan standing there, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "You're going to get yourself thrown in the brig," he said quietly. Alara met his gaze, her voice firm. "I'd rather face Rirk's wrath than lead us all to our deaths." Kyan hesitated, then sighed, his resolve softening. "You're going to need help." Together, they worked in silence, the weight of their actions hanging heavy in the air. But as the new course was set, the ship shuddered violently, the hull groaning under the strain. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to their stations, their faces pale with panic. The energy fields were closing in, their chaotic energy lashing out like tendrils. A jagged crack appeared in the observation window, the sound of splintering glass sending a chill through the ship. Rirk's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Report what's happening." Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding. "The fields are destabilizing the hull. We need to change course. Now." Rirk's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it, she saw a flicker of doubt. The crew watched, their loyalty hanging in the balance. The ship groaned again, the sound like a warning from the void itself. The choice was clear: follow the mission and risk destruction, or trust Elara and face the unknown. The tension was palpable, the air thick with fear and uncertainty, and as the energy fields closed in, the question lingered, unspoken but deafening. Could they survive the void, or had they already gone too far? The ship groaned as the new course took hold, the chaotic energy fields receding like a storm, passing into the distance. For a moment, there was silence, a fragile, uneasy calm. But it didn't last. The crew's relief turned to suspicion as the logs revealed the unauthorized course correction. Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon, all eyes turned to Elara. Captain Rirk's face was a mask of anger as he confronted her in the command center, his voice sharp and unyielding. "You overstepped, Doctor. You tampered with the ship's systems without authorization. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Elara stood her ground, her voice steady despite the weight of his accusation. "I saved us. If we'd stayed on that course, the energy fields would have torn the ship apart." Her words hung in the air, met with silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, torn between loyalty to their captain and the undeniable truth of her actions. But Rirk's patience had run out. "You've committed treason," he said coldly. "Confine her to quarters. We'll deal with this when we return to Earth." As the guards escorted her away, Elara's mind raced. Her freedom was gone, but the signal, its pull stronger than ever, remained. The mystery wasn't over, and neither was her resolve. That night, as the ship hummed with tension, a soft knock came at her door. Kyan stepped inside, his face grim but determined. "I don't agree with what you did," he said quietly, "but I can't let them bury this. The signal, it's not just a curiosity. It's something more, and I think you're the only one who can figure it out." Together, they slipped through the ship's shadowed corridors, avoiding patrols and surveillance. Kyan led her to a hidden compartment deep within the engineering bay, where he'd been analyzing the signal in secret. The data streamed across the screen, a chaotic jumble of patterns and frequencies. But as Elara studied it, something extraordinary emerged. The signal wasn't random noise. It was a message, a deliberate, intricately coded transmission from an ancient civilization, one far more advanced than anything humanity had encountered. Her breath caught as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a revelation. The civilization behind the signal had left something behind, a warning, a gift, or perhaps a call for help. Elara's determination burned brighter than ever. "We can't let them turn back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This could change everything for humanity, for the future. We have to decode this." But time was running out. The crew, shaken by recent events, had lost faith in the mission. Voices grew louder, demanding they abandon the signal and return to Earth. Captain Rirk, though conflicted, seemed ready to comply. The ship's course was already shifting, the stars realigning as they prepared for the long journey home. Elara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. If they left now, the message and whatever it held would be lost forever. Kyan watched her closely, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You're risking everything," he said. "If they catch us again, there's no coming back." Elara met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I know, but this isn't just about me, or even this crew. This message, it could be the key to humanity's survival. We can't turn away from that." The stakes had never been higher. As the ship drifted further from the signal, Elara and Kyan worked in secret, their fingers flying across the console as they pieced together fragments of the ancient message. Each breakthrough brought them closer to the truth, but also deeper into danger. The crew's mistrust simmered, and Rirk's patience wore thinner with each passing hour. The tension aboard the ship was a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Elara's mind raced with possibilities. What had the civilization behind the signal discovered? What were they trying to say, and why now, after millennia of silence? The answers were within reach, but so was the precipice of failure. As the ship's engines hummed with the promise of home, Elara knew one thing for certain: the signal wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a calling, one she couldn't ignore, no matter the cost. The dim glow of the engineering bay flickered as Elara and Kyan bent over the console, their focus unyielding. The ancient message sprawled across the screen in a chaotic dance of symbols and frequencies, each fragment a tantalizing glimpse into a civilization long lost to time. Kyan's voice broke the silence, his tone tinged with both awe and frustration. "This isn't just a message, it's a map, a blueprint for something bigger. But we're missing pieces. Without them, it's just noise." Elara nodded, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the decoding parameters. "We're close," she murmured, though the weight of their task pressed heavily on her shoulders. "If we can just..." Her words were cut short as the ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering before plunging the bay into near darkness. Alarms blared, their shrill tones echoing through the corridors. Kyan's console lit up with a cascade of warnings: hull breaches, power fluctuations, and an unidentified energy signature closing in fast. "What the..." Kyan's voice trailed off as the ship I stuttered to life, its voice distorted and frantic. "Unauthorized entity detected. Security protocols compromised." Elara's heart raced as she turned toward the observation window. Beyond the glass, a swirling mass of light and energy loomed, its form shifting and pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. It wasn't a ship, nor was it anything she'd ever encountered. The entity moved with purpose, its tendrils of energy lashing out against the ship's hull, sending sparks cascading through the corridors. "It's not attacking," Elara said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's trying to communicate. Look at the patterns, it's echoing the signal." Captain Rirk's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and commanding. "All hands, brace for impact. Security teams, arm yourselves and prepare to repel the intruder." Elara's stomach dropped. "No," she whispered, her mind racing. "If we attack it, we'll lose any chance of understanding what it is, or what it wants." Kyan grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Elara, we don't have a choice." If it breaches the hull, we're all dead. But Alara's instincts screamed otherwise. The entity's movements weren't hostile. They were deliberate, almost curious. As she watched, its energy patterns shifted, aligning with the fragments of the ancient message still displayed on the console. "It's not a threat," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "It's responding to the signal. It knows something." Kyan hesitated, his gaze flickering between her and the entity. "Even if you're right, Rirk won't listen. He's already given the order." The ship trembled again as security teams mobilized, their weapons trained on the entity. Alara's mind raced. If she obeyed Rirk's orders, the chance to decode the message, and perhaps uncover the truth behind the signal, would be lost forever. But if she intervened, she risked not only her own safety, but the fragile trust of the crew. The entity's energy pulsed brighter, its tendrils brushing against the ship's hull with an almost gentle touch. It was waiting, watching, and in that moment, Alara made her choice. She grabbed a portable transmitter from the console and sprinted toward the airlock, Kyan shouting after her. "Alara, what are you doing? You'll get yourself killed." She didn't look back. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped inside, her breath visible in the sudden chill. The entity's energy filled the space beyond the outer door, its light casting eerie shadows across her face. She activated the transmitter, the device humming as it broadcasted the decoded fragments of the message. "If you can understand me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "show me, help me understand." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entity's energy shifted, its tendrils retracting as it formed a single, coherent beam of light. The beam connected with the transmitter, and Alara's mind was flooded with visions of a dying civilization. Their final act, a desperate attempt to warn others of a cataclysm that spanned galaxies. The message wasn't just a map, it was a plea, a cry for help, and the entity, it was a remnant of that civilization, a guardian tasked with preserving their legacy. Back inside the ship, chaos erupted. The crew watched in horror as the entity's energy surged, destabilizing the ship's systems. Power flickered, and the AI's voice grew erratic. "Critical failure imminent, core systems at risk." Rirk's voice boomed over the intercom, laced with fury. "Voss, stand down. You're endangering the entire crew." But Alara wouldn't stop. The entity's message was too important, its purpose too vital to ignore. As the ship's systems began to fail, the crew's anger turned to fear. Kyan stood at the edge of the engineering bay, torn between loyalty to Alara and the growing threat to the ship. The entity's energy pulsed brighter, its connection to Alara deepening. She felt its urgency, its desperation to communicate, but the cost of that connection was clear. The ship was breaking apart under the strain. The crew's survival hung in the balance, and Alara's decision to protect the entity had pushed them all to the brink. In the command center, Rirk clenched his fists, his patience gone. "Prepare the ion cannons," he ordered, his voice cold. "We're taking it out." Alara's heart pounded as she realized what was about to happen. The entity's light dimmed, its energy flickering as if sensing the impending attack. She had mere seconds to act, to choose between the crew's safety and the chance to unlock the secrets of a civilization lost to time. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, but in the end, she knew what she had to do. The signal had called to her for a reason, and she couldn't turn away now. Not when the truth, and perhaps humanity's future, was at stake. Alara's mind reeled as the entity's message poured into her consciousness, a flood of images and sensations that defied comprehension. The signal wasn't just a warning, it was a dire prediction. A cataclysmic event, a wave of cosmic destruction, was hurtling through the galaxy, and Earth lay directly in its path. The entity's urgency was palpable, its energy pulsing with a desperate plea. Follow, it seemed to say, not in words but in a cascade of emotions and images. It could guide them to safety, to a place beyond the reach of the coming storm, but the path it offered was uncharted, a leap into the unknown. She stumbled back into the ship, her breath ragged, the weight of what she'd learned pressing down on her. The crew's faces were a blur of confusion and fear as she burst into the command center, her voice trembling but insistent. We're in danger, all of us. The signal, it's a warning. The entity can lead us to safety, but we have to trust it. Captain Rirk's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he stepped forward. Trust it, he snapped, his voice dripping with disbelief. That thing has been tampering with our systems since we entered this sector, and now you want us to follow it blindly. This is exactly what it wants, to lure us deeper into its trap. The crew murmured uneasily, their eyes darting between Alara and Rirk. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with distrust. Alara's chest tightened as she struggled to find the words to make them understand. I've seen it, she said, her voice breaking. The destruction, it's real. If we don't act now, there won't be an Earth to return to. But Rirk's resolve was unshaken. We're not abandoning the mission on the word of some anomaly. Our orders are clear. We stay the course. The divide between them grew wider with every passing second. Alara's fists clenched, her frustration boiling over. Orders won't matter if we're all dead, she shot back, her voice rising. This isn't about protocol, it's about survival. Can't you see that? Rirk's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. What I see, he said coldly, is a scientist who's lost her objectivity. You're risking everything on a hunch, and I won't let you drag this crew down with you. The room fell silent, the weight of their standoff hanging heavy in the air. Alara's heart pounded as she realized the stakes. If she backed down now, the opportunity to save Earth and themselves would be lost. But if she defied Rirk, she'd be branded a mutineer, her credibility shattered. The choice was agonizing, but in that moment, she knew what she had to do. I'm not asking for permission, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. I'm asking you to trust me, just this once. Rirk's expression hardened, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. Stand down, Doctor. That's an order. But Alara was already moving, her fingers flying across the console as she initiated the course correction. The ship lurched, its trajectory shifting as the entity's guidance took hold. Alarms blared, and the crew erupted into chaos. What are you doing? Rirk shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. You've gone too far. Security teams surged forward, their weapons trained on Alara, but she stood her ground, her eyes locked on the entity's shimmering form beyond the window. I'm doing what I have to, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. If you want to stop me, "You'll have to shoot me." The room froze, the tension reaching a breaking point. Rirk's hand tightened on his weapon, his gaze flickering between Alara and the entity. For a moment, it seemed as though he might pull the trigger. But then, the ship shuddered violently, its hull groaning under the strain of the entity's energy. The cosmic event was drawing closer, its presence a palpable force that sent tremors through the ship. The crew's fear turned to panic as the lights flickered and the AI's voice crackled with static. "Warning, critical systems failure imminent." Alara's heart raced as she realized they were out of time. The entity's light pulsed brighter, its energy surging as it tried to stabilize the ship, but the damage was done. The crew's unity had fractured, and the ship was teetering on the edge of disaster. In the chaos, Kyan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "She's right," he said, his tone firm. "We can't ignore this. If there's even a chance she's telling the truth, we have to take it." Rirk turned on him, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're siding with her, after everything." Kyan met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm siding with survival. And right now, that means trusting her." The crew hesitated, torn between loyalty to their captain and the desperate hope that Alara's gamble might save them. The ship groaned again, its systems straining under the weight of the cosmic event. Alara's voice rose above the chaos, her words a desperate plea. "We don't have time to argue. If we don't follow the entity now, we're all going to die." The moment hung in the balance, the crew's fate resting on a single, impossible choice. And as the ship hurtled toward the unknown, Alara couldn't help but wonder, had she saved them, or had she doomed them all? The ship surged forward, propelled by the entity's energy, through a maze of unstable wormholes. Each passage was a kaleidoscope of swirling light and distorted space, the walls of reality bending and twisting around them. The crew clung to their stations, their faces pale with fear as the ship shuddered violently. The wormholes were unstable, their edges fraying like threads pulled too tight. Every jump brought them closer to the entity's destination, but the cost was becoming unbearable. As the ship navigated the chaotic pathways, the crew began to experience strange, unsettling visions. Dr. Kyan Malik found himself back on Earth, standing in a field of golden wheat under a setting sun. The air was warm, the breeze gentle, but the peace was shattered by a voice, his own whispering, "You'll never see this again." He blinked, and the vision was gone, replaced by the cold, sterile walls of the ship. Across the command center, others were similarly afflicted. One officer saw her childhood home engulfed in flames, while another found himself trapped in a dark, endless corridor, the walls closing in. Elara's vision was the most vivid of all. Her father stood before her, his frail form bathed in a soft, golden light. His voice was calm but urgent. "Elara," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and pride. "You've carried this guilt long enough. It's time to let it go. You're not just a scientist. You're a leader. Trust yourself, and they'll trust you." She reached out to him, but her hand passed through his form as if he were made of mist. The vision faded, leaving her trembling and disoriented, the weight of his words lingering in her mind. The crew's trust in Alara, already fragile, began to waver further. The vision stirred up old fears and doubts, their minds unraveling under the strain. "What's happening to us?" one crew member demanded, his voice cracking with panic. Is this because of her? Because of that thing? The murmurs grew louder, their accusatory glances cutting through Alara like knives. Even Kyan, her closest ally, seemed shaken, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a tense, guarded expression. These visions, he said quietly, they're not just random. They're pulling at something deep inside us, and I don't know how much more we can take. The ship's systems, already pushed to their limits by the wormholes, began to falter. Warning lights flashed across the console, and the AI's voice crackled with static. Structural integrity compromised, it announced, its tone eerily calm. Hull stress at critical levels. The crew's anxiety spiked as the ship groaned under the strain, its metal frame creaking like a living thing. Elara's heart raced as she realized the enormity of what they were facing. The wormholes weren't just unstable, they were collapsing. Each jump brought them closer to being trapped in the void, their ship torn apart by the chaotic forces of space. Captain Rirk's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. We need to abort this course, now, before it's too late. His eyes locked onto Alara's, his frustration and fear laid bare. You've led us into a nightmare, Doctor, and if we don't turn back, we're all going to die. Alara met his gaze, her mind racing. The entity's guidance had been their only hope, but now it felt like a double-edged sword. The visions, the collapsing wormholes, the crew's fraying trust. It was all spiraling out of control. The ship lurched violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. The wormhole ahead flickered, its edges collapsing inward like a dying star. The entity's energy pulsed brighter, its light casting eerie shadows across the command center. Elara's father's words echoed in her mind. Trust yourself. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the chaos. We can't turn back, she said, her tone firm. If we do, we'll be caught in the collapse. The only way out is through. The crew hesitated, their fear and doubt palpable. But as the wormhole ahead began to disintegrate, they had no choice but to follow her lead. The ship surged forward, its engines straining as it hurtled toward the narrowing passage. The walls of the wormhole closed in around them, the light dimming as the void threatened to swallow them whole. Elara's hands tightened on the console, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that would define them all. Either they would emerge on the other side, or they would be lost forever. The ship trembled violently, its hull groaning under the pressure. The crew held their breath, their eyes fixed on the narrowing passage ahead. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the wormhole collapsed. The ship was thrown into darkness, the lights flickering as the systems struggled to stabilize. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a heavy, oppressive stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, slowly, the lights came back on, revealing a sight that left them all speechless. They had emerged into a region of space, unlike anything they had ever seen. Stars shimmered like diamonds scattered across velvet, their light reflecting off massive, crystalline structures that floated in the void. The entity's energy pulsed gently, its light blending with the stars. They had made it, but at what cost? The crew's faces were pale, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. The journey had taken its toll, and the question lingered in the air. Had they escaped the void, or had they simply traded one nightmare for another? The Deep Space Observatory drifted into the shadow of a colossal structure, its jagged silhouette cutting through the light of a dying star. The ancient edifice loomed before them, a labyrinth of crystalline spires and metallic arches that seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly resonance. The entity's energy pulsed gently, its light merging with the structure's glow as if in recognition. "This is it," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible over the ship's systems. The repository of knowledge, the key to understanding the cosmic event. The crew gathered in the observation deck, their faces a mix of awe and apprehension. Captain Rirk stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the structure. "A graveyard," he muttered, his tone laced with bitterness, "built by a civilization that couldn't save itself. And now we're supposed to believe it can save us." Alara turned to him, her gaze steady. "They try to stop the event, to warn others. If we can access their knowledge, we might have a chance. But we have to go inside." The crew's unease was palpable. The structure was a monument to failure, a reminder of what could happen if they, too, fell short. But Alara's conviction was unshaken. "We didn't come this far to turn back now," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about survival, it's about hope. And if we don't take this chance, we'll never forgive ourselves." Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread of unity in the face of uncertainty. After a tense debate, the crew reluctantly agreed to explore the structure. They prepared for the mission, their movements stiff with tension. As they approached the ancient edifice in a shuttle, the sheer scale of it became overwhelming. Towering spires loomed above them, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. The entity guided them to an opening, a massive gateway that pulsed faintly with energy. But as they stepped inside, the air grew heavy, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The first sign of trouble came without warning. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, the walls came alive, panels sliding open to reveal automated defenses, drones armed with weapons that crackled with energy. The crew barely had time to react before the first shots rang out, the air exploding with light and sound. "Fall back," Rirk shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. But retreat wasn't an option. The drones advanced relentlessly, their movements precise and unyielding. In the fray, Kyan was struck, a burst of energy slamming into his chest and sending him sprawling. Alara's heart lurched as she rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she assessed the damage. His breathing was shallow, his face pale with pain. "Alara," he gasped, his voice weak. "You were right. This is bigger than us, but at what cost?" His words cut through her like a knife, the weight of his injury and her choices settling heavily on her shoulders. The battle raged on, the crew fighting desperately to hold their ground. The drones were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. But as the crew struggled to fend them off, a realization began to dawn. The structure wasn't just a repository, it was a test. A final, desperate measure by its creators to ensure that only those worthy of their knowledge could access it, and the cost of that knowledge was becoming painfully clear. Rirk's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "We can't keep this up. If we don't find a way to shut these things down, we're done for." Alara's mind raced, her eyes darting to the entity's pulsing light. It seemed to be guiding her, its energy drawing her attention to a control panel embedded in the wall. "There," she shouted, pointing to the panel. "If we can override it, we might be able to disable the defenses." But the panel was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by drones. Reaching it would be suicide. Elara hesitated, her thoughts swirling with doubt. How many more were willing to risk their lives for her obsession? Kyan's words echoed in her mind. At what cost? She looked at the crew, their faces etched with fear and determination. This wasn't just her mission anymore, it was theirs. And if they were going to succeed, they would have to stand together. The crew rallied, their movements coordinated as they fought their way toward the panel. The drones closed in, their weapons blazing, but the crew pressed forward, driven by a newfound resolve. As they reached the panel, Alara's fingers flew across the controls, her heart pounding as she worked to decipher the alien interface. The entity's energy surged around her, its light guiding her hands. And then, with a final, decisive input, the drones powered down, their lights dimming as they fell silent. The room was suddenly quiet, the air thick with tension. The crew stood amidst the wreckage, their faces pale with exhaustion. Kyan lay motionless, his condition critical. Elara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she administered what little aid she could. The cost of their journey was written in his pain, in the weariness of the crew, in the shattered remains of the drones. But the structure's secrets were within reach, and the cosmic event loomed ever closer. As the crew regrouped, Elara's mind turned to the final challenge. The repository's core lay deeper within the structure, its knowledge guarded by even greater defenses. Accessing it would require more than just skill. It would require sacrifice. The ship, their only means of escape, might not survive the process, and as Elara looked at the faces of her crew, she knew the decision ahead would test them all. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure was unthinkable, but the truth, and perhaps humanity's survival, was just within their grasp. The crystalline corridors of the ancient structure stretched endlessly before them, their surfaces shimmering with faint, pulsating light. Elara led the small team cautiously, her breath visible in the cold, thin air. Every step echoed through the vast emptiness, a reminder of the civilization that had once thrived here. The entity's energy guided them, its light flickering like a beacon in the dark. As they moved deeper, the walls seemed to come alive, etched with intricate carvings that told a story of triumph and tragedy. Elara paused, her fingers tracing the symbols. This is their history," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. "Their rise, their fall, and their final warning." The team pressed on, their footsteps quickening as the urgency of their mission weighed heavily. The archives were vast, a labyrinth of knowledge preserved in crystalline data banks. Elara's heart raced as she accessed the first console, her fingers trembling over the alien interface. Images and data flooded the screen, blueprints, schematics, and records of a civilization that had once been as vast and powerful as the stars themselves. But amidst the wealth of knowledge, one discovery stood out: a device capable of generating a shield strong enough to protect Earth from the cosmic event. Her pulse quickened. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is how we save them." But the device wasn't just a solution, it was a gamble. Activating it required an immense amount of energy, far beyond what the Deep Space Observatory could provide. Alara's mind raced as she studied the schematics, her thoughts churning with possibility. The ship's core, she said finally, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. If we redirect its power, we can activate the device, but it would leave us stranded here, with no way to return. The room fell silent, the gravity of her proposal sinking in. Captain Rirk was the first to speak, his voice sharp and unyielding. "You're asking us to sacrifice the ship, and ourselves, for a chance to save Earth. That's not a plan, that's a death sentence." His words hung in the air, met with uneasy glances from the crew. Alara stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "It's not just a chance, it's our only chance. We didn't come this far to turn back now. If we don't act, Earth will be lost. Billions of lives gone. Isn't that worth the risk?" The crew's faces were a mix of fear, doubt, and determination. Kyan, still weak from his injury, spoke up, his voice strained but resolute. "She's right. We've already lost too much to give up now. If this is what it takes, then we do it." Others nodded, their resolve hardening, but Rirk's expression remained stony. "And what if it doesn't work?" he demanded. "What if we're stranded here, with no way to warn Earth, no way to help them? You're gambling with their lives too." Elara's chest tightened, but she held her ground. "I'm not saying it's an easy choice, but it's the only one we have. If we don't try, we've already failed." The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of the decision pressing down on them all. The cosmic event loomed closer with each passing moment, its approach a ticking clock they couldn't ignore. As the crew debated, Alara's mind turned to the device. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to the ingenuity of the civilization that had built it. But it was also a reminder of their failure. The archives had revealed the truth. They had tried to stop the cosmic event, but they hadn't acted soon enough. Their hesitation had cost them everything. Alara couldn't let that happen again. She turned to the crew, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "We've come too far to let fear stop us now. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone we've ever known, everyone we've ever loved. If we don't do this, they'll have no chance." The crew's hesitation began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. Even Rirk, though still visibly conflicted, nodded reluctantly. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We'll do it your way, but if this goes wrong, it's on you." Alara nodded, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She knew the risks, but she also knew the cost of inaction. The crew moved quickly, their movements sharp and purposeful, as they prepared to redirect the ship's core. The cosmic event grew closer, its presence a palpable force that sent tremors through the structure. The air was thick with tension as the crew worked, their breaths shallow, their hands steady despite the fear gnawing at them. Alara stood at the center of it all, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and determination. She had pushed them to this point, and now there was no turning back. The device hummed faintly as they connected it to the ship's core, its energy building slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. As the final connections were made, the crew gathered around the device, their faces pale but resolute. The entity's energy pulsed gently, its light blending with the device's glow. Elara's heart pounded as she activated the sequence, her fingers trembling over the controls. The device surged to life, its energy radiating outward in a brilliant wave of light. For a moment, everything was still, the air thick with anticipation. Then, the ship's core began to destabilize, its power draining rapidly as the device consumed its energy. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder as the ship's systems faltered. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their fears unspoken but shared. The cosmic event loomed closer, its approach a deafening roar that shook the very fabric of space. Elara's hands tightened on the controls, her breath shallow as she watched the device's energy build. This was it, the moment that would define them all. The gamble, the sacrifice, the hope, it all came down to this. And as the cosmic event bore down on them, Alara could only pray that it would be enough. The ship's core glowed with an eerie, unstable light as the crew initiated the power transfer, their movements tense and deliberate. The device hummed faintly at first, its energy building slowly as it drew power from the ship's systems. For a moment, it seemed everything might go according to plan. But then, without warning, the core's energy surged violently, sending tremors through the structure. Alarms blared, their shrill tones cutting through the air like a knife. The core's destabilizing, one of the engineers shouted, panic edging into their voice. If we don't shut it down, the entire structure could collapse. Elara's heart raced as she scanned the data streaming across the console. The power transfer was overloading the core, its systems unable to handle the strain. She turned to Kyan, her voice sharp with urgency. We need to reroute the energy, manually stabilize the core before it's too late. He nodded, his face pale but determined. Together, they sprinted toward the core's control room, their footsteps echoing through the trembling corridors. The room was a chaos of flashing lights and sparking wires, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning circuits. Kyan moved quickly, his hands flying across the console as he worked to reroute the energy. If we can divert the excess power into the structure's auxiliary systems, he said, his voice strained, we might buy ourselves enough time to complete the transfer. Elara nodded, her own hands trembling as she adjusted the controls. The core's energy pulsed erratically, its light growing brighter and more unstable with each passing second. But the strain was too much. The structure groaned under the pressure, its crystalline walls beginning to crack. We're losing it, Kyan shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. Elara's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. If they didn't act now, the entire mission, and the lives of everyone aboard, would be lost. She turned to Kyan, her eyes pleading. There's no other way. We have to override the safeties and force the transfer through. Kyan hesitated, his gaze flickering between her and the console. He knew the risks as well as she did. Overriding the safeties could cause a catastrophic failure, potentially destroying the core and the ship along with it. But the alternative was unthinkable. He took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Do it. I'll hold the core together as long as I can. Elara's heart sank at his words, but she nodded, her hands moving swiftly to initiate the override. The moment she activated the sequence, the core's energy surged violently, its light blinding. Kyan stood at the center of the storm, his hands gripping the controls as he fought to stabilize the system. "It's working," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the core. The transfer is almost complete, but then, with a deafening crack, the core's containment field began to fail. Sparks flew, and the room filled with smoke as the systems overloaded. Kyan's face was a mask of determination, his eyes locked on the console. "Go," he yelled, his voice breaking. "Finish it, I'll hold it together." Alara's heart shattered as she realized what he was doing. He wasn't just stabilizing the core, he was sacrificing himself to ensure the transfer completed. Tears streamed down her face as she worked, her hands trembling but resolute. The device's energy surged, its light piercing the chaos as it neared activation, but the cost was unbearable. Kyan's voice crackled over the comms, weak but steady. "You've got this, Elara. Don't stop now." The core's light flared one final time, and then it was gone, consumed by the overload. The room fell silent, the air thick with smoke and grief. Elara's vision blurred as she collapsed to her knees, the weight of Kyan's sacrifice pressing down on her, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The device was almost fully charged, its energy radiating outward in a brilliant wave. The cosmic event loomed closer, its approach a deafening roar that shook the very fabric of space. With trembling hands, Alara activated the device, its energy building to a crescendo. The structure groaned under the strain, its crystalline walls beginning to shatter. But as the cosmic event reached its peak, the device's energy surged outward, forming a shield that enveloped Earth in a shimmering barrier. The crew watched in awe as the cataclysmic wave struck the shield, its energy dissipating harmlessly against the barrier. Earth was safe, but at a cost that left them hollow. Alara stood amidst the wreckage, her heart heavy with grief and relief. The mission was a success, but the price had been too high. Kyan's sacrifice weighed heavily on her, a reminder of the cost of their journey. The structure around them began to collapse, its crystalline spires crumbling into the void. The crew scrambled to the ship, their movements sharp with urgency. As they boarded, Alara took one last look at the structure, its light fading into the darkness. The journey had changed them all, but the fight wasn't over. The cosmic event had been stopped, but the universe was vast, and the mysteries it held were far from solved. The Deep Space Observatory drifted silently within the crumbling remains of the ancient structure, its systems barely functioning after the core's catastrophic failure. The once bustling ship now felt like a ghost of itself, its corridors dimly lit and eerily quiet. Supplies were running dangerously low, and the crew moved with a heaviness that mirrored the weight of their situation. Stranded light years from Earth, with no way to call for help, the reality of their predicament settled over them like a suffocating fog. Yet, amidst the despair, a spark of determination began to flicker, led by Alara. She stood in the command center, her eyes scanning the flickering console displays. The crew watched her, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and faint hope. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet resolve. This structure was built by a civilization that faced impossible odds, just like we are now. If they could leave behind a device to save us, they might have left us a way to save ourselves. Her words were met with silence, but the glimmer of possibility began to spread. Elara's relentless drive led her to a discovery that changed everything. Deep within the structure, hidden behind layers of crumbling walls and dormant systems, she found a chamber unlike any they'd encountered. At its center was a prototype engine, its design both alien and awe-inspiring. The device pulsed faintly, its surface etched with the same intricate patterns they'd seen throughout the structure. "It's a wormhole generator," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But it's unstable, untested. If we activate it, there's no guarantee it won't tear us apart." The crew gathered in the chamber, their faces pale as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. Captain Rirk, though visibly worn, was the first to speak. "You're asking us to gamble our lives on a machine we don't understand, built by a civilization that failed to save itself. How can we trust it?" His words hung in the air, met with uneasy murmurs from the crew. The risk was undeniable, but so was the alternative. Elara stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I know this feels impossible," she said, her voice firm but empathetic. "But we've come this far because we refuse to give up. This engine, it's not just a machine, it's a chance to see our families again, to share what we've learned, to make sure Kyan's sacrifice wasn't in vain. I can't promise it'll work, but I can promise this: if we don't try, we'll never know." The crew exchanged glances, their unease palpable. One by one, they began to nod, their resolve hardening. Even Rirk, though still skeptical, conceded. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "But if this goes wrong, it's on you." Elara nodded, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She knew the risks, but she also knew the cost of inaction. As the crew prepared to activate the engine, the air grew thick with tension. The prototype hummed faintly, its energy building slowly as they worked to stabilize its systems. The chamber around them seemed to pulse in sync with the engine, the ancient structure's final gift, or perhaps its final test. Elara's hands trembled as she adjusted the controls, her mind racing with the enormity of what they were about to attempt. The crew stood ready, their faces a mix of fear and determination. This was their last chance, and they knew it. The moment of truth arrived. Elara's finger hovered over the activation switch, her heart pounding in her chest. "On my mark," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The crew braced themselves, their breaths shallow, their eyes fixed on the engine. 3, 2, 1. She pressed the switch, and the chamber erupted in light. The engine roared to life, its energy surging outward in a blinding wave. The structure around them trembled, its crystalline walls cracking under the strain. The crew held their ground, their faith in Elara and in each other unwavering. As the light subsided, the engine's hum grew steadier, its energy stabilizing. A swirling vortex of light and energy formed before them, its edges shimmering like the surface of a storm-tossed sea. The wormhole was open. Elara's breath caught as she realized what they'd done. It worked, she whispered, her voice filled with awe, but the journey wasn't over. The wormhole was unstable, its path uncertain. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their relief tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. Elara turned to them, her expression resolute. "This is it," she said, her voice carrying the weight of their shared journey. "We've faced the impossible, and we've come this far. Whatever's on the other side, We'll face it together." The crew nodded, their trust in her unshaken. As the ship began to move toward the wormhole, the ancient structure around them began to collapse, its light fading into the void. The journey had tested them in ways they'd never imagined, but they had endured. And now, with the wormhole before them, they stepped into the unknown, not as individuals, but as a team, bound by sacrifice, hope, and the unyielding pursuit of the stars. The ship shuddered violently as the prototype engine roared to life, its energy tearing through the fabric of space. The wormhole unfolded before them like a storm, its edges rippling with chaotic light. The crew braced themselves as the Deep Space Observatory was drawn into the vortex, the ship groaning under the immense strain. Inside, the world dissolved into chaos. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the hull creaked as if it might split apart at any moment. Elara gripped the console, her knuckles white as she fought to steady her breathing. This wasn't just a journey through space. It was a plunge into the unknown, a test of their courage and endurance. The wormhole was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. Its energy lashed at the ship like a living thing, each jolt rattling the crew to their core. The navigation systems faltered, their readings a jumble of conflicting data. "We're off course," one of the engineers shouted, panic edging into their voice. "The wormhole's collapsing around us." Elara's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the chaos. The prototype engine was holding, but barely. They were hurtling through a tunnel of light and shadow, the walls of reality bending and twisting around them. It was a race against time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Amid the chaos, Elara felt a strange calm wash over her. The noise of the ship faded, replaced by a profound stillness. She blinked, and suddenly she wasn't on the ship anymore. She stood in a field of golden wheat, the sun warm on her skin. Her father stood before her, his face gentle and filled with pride. "Elara," he said, his voice soft but unwavering, "you've done enough. You've carried this burden long enough. It's time to let go." His words pierced through her, a mix of comfort and sorrow. She wanted to reach out to him, to hold on to the moment, but the vision began to fade. "You've always been stronger than you think," he whispered, his voice echoing in her mind. "Trust yourself." The vision left her breathless, her heart pounding as the ship's alarms brought her back to reality. But something had shifted. The weight of her guilt, her fear, her doubt, it hadn't vanished, but it no longer held her captive. She straightened, her resolve hardening. "We're not giving up," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Not now, not ever." The crew turned to her, their faces pale but determined. She met their gazes, her own steady and unyielding. "We've come too far to let this beat us. Stay focused. We'll make it through." The ship groaned again, its hull buckling under the strain. A jagged crack appeared in the observation window, the sound of splintering glass sending a chill through the crew. The wormhole was collapsing faster than they'd anticipated, its walls closing in around them. The prototype engine sputtered, its energy faltering as the strain became too much. "We're losing power." Kyan's voice crackled over the comms, his tone urgent. "If we don't stabilize the engine, we'll be trapped in here." Elara's mind raced as she scanned the data. The wormhole's instability was beyond anything they'd prepared for, but they couldn't afford to fail. "Not now," She turned to the crew, her voice steady despite the storm around them. We need to reroute power from the secondary systems, everything we've got. If we can boost the engine, even for a few seconds, it might be enough to push us through. The crew moved quickly, their hands flying across the consoles as they worked to stabilize the ship. The tension in the air was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. The wormhole's walls closed in, their light dimming as the void threatened to swallow them whole. Elara's hands tightened on the controls, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that would define them all. The engine surged one final time, its light piercing the darkness as the ship was hurled forward. The wormhole collapsed behind them, its energy dissipating into the void. For a moment, there was silence, a heavy, oppressive stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, slowly, the lights came back on, the ship's systems stabilizing as they emerged into open space. The crew exhaled collectively, their relief palpable. They had made it, but the cost was clear. The ship was battered, its hull scarred and its systems barely functioning. Yet amidst the wreckage, there was a sense of triumph. They had faced the impossible and emerged on the other side. Alara stood at the center of it all, her heart heavy but resolute. The journey had tested them in ways they'd never imagined, but they had endured. The vision of her father lingered in her mind, a reminder of the strength she carried within her. The crew gathered around her, their faces a mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. They had survived the wormhole, but the journey wasn't over. Ahead of them lay the unknown, the mysteries of the universe waiting to be uncovered. And as the Deep Space Observatory drifted into the vast expanse of space, Alara knew one thing for certain: they were ready to face whatever came next. The Deep Space Observatory limped into the outer reaches of Earth's orbit, its battered hull casting long shadows against the blue glow of the planet below. The ship, once a marvel of engineering, now resembled a wounded beast, its systems flickering and groaning under the strain of the journey. The crew gathered in the command center, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They were home, or at least within sight of it, but the ship was in no condition to land. Critical systems were failing, and the engines were on the verge of collapse. The reality of their situation was stark. They were so close, yet still impossibly far. Alara stood at the center of the chaos, her mind racing as she assessed the damage. The ship's power reserves were dangerously low, barely enough to keep life support running. If they didn't act quickly, they'd drift aimlessly, their fate sealed by their own crippled vessel. She turned to the crew, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We need to send a distress signal," she said, her tone firm but calm. "Earth has to know we're here." But the ship's comms are down, and the only way to send a signal is to reroute power manually from the core. The room fell silent, the implications of her words sinking in. Rerouting power from the core was no simple task. It required someone to stay behind, to manually override the systems while the rest of the crew evacuated. It was a one-way mission, a sacrifice that might mean never seeing Earth again. Alara didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said, her voice carrying a quiet resolve. "I know the systems better than anyone, and if it comes down to it, I'm ready." The protests came immediately. "You can't be serious," one of the engineers said, their voice tinged with disbelief. "There has to be another way." Captain Rirk stepped forward, his expression a mix of anger and concern. "This isn't just about you, Alara," he said, his tone sharp. "You've led us this far. We need you." But Alara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "This isn't about me," she replied. "It's about all of us. If I don't do this, none of us make it home. And I won't let that happen." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their emotions a whirlwind of fear, gratitude, and reluctant acceptance. Alara's decision wasn't just a sacrifice. It was a testament to her leadership, her unyielding commitment to their survival. And in that moment, something shifted. The tension that had divided them for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet respect. They had doubted her, questioned her, even resented her at times. But now, as she stood ready to give everything for their sake, they saw her for what she truly was. Not just a scientist, but a leader willing to bear the weight of the impossible. The evacuation preparations began in earnest, the crew working swiftly to ready the escape pods. The ship's systems groaned in protest, their lights flickering as power reserves dwindled. Elara moved through the chaos with purpose, her hands steady as she configured the core's override. The stakes were higher than ever, the margin for error razor thin. One misstep, and the signal might never reach Earth, but she didn't falter. Every action, every decision was precise and deliberate. This was her final act, her chance to ensure the crew's survival, and she wouldn't let them down. As the crew gathered at the escape pods, their faces pale with the weight of what was to come, Alara turned to them one last time. "You've got this," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "Get to Earth, tell them what we found, and don't let this be for nothing." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of connection in the face of an uncertain future. The crew nodded, their trust in her, and in each other unshakable. They boarded the pods, their movements quick but heavy with emotion. The ship's alarms blared as the escape pods launched, their lights fading into the distance as they sped toward Earth. Elara stood alone in the command center, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The ship groaned around her, its systems failing one by one. She activated the override, her fingers trembling only slightly as she input the final commands. The signal surged outward, a beacon of hope in the vast emptiness of space. And then, with a final shuddering breath, the ship fell silent. Elara sank into the captain's chair, her eyes fixed on the blue glow of Earth. She had done it. The crew was safe, the signal sent. But as the ship drifted, its power fading, she couldn't help but wonder, had she truly saved them, or had she merely delayed the inevitable? The question lingered, unanswered, as the stars stretched endlessly before her, and in that quiet, fleeting moment, she found a strange peace. The journey had changed her, tested her, and in the end, revealed the strength she had always carried within. Whatever came next, she was ready. The Deep Space Observatory groaned under the strain of its final moments, its hull buckling as the distress signal pulsed outward into the void. Elara stood alone on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the blue glow of Earth, growing larger through the cracked observation window. The escape pods had launched, their lights fading into the distance as the crew hurtled toward safety. But for Elara, there was no escape. The ship's systems were failing, its power reserves nearly depleted. She had done what she set out to do, save the crew, sent the signal. But now, as the ship began its uncontrolled descent into Earth's atmosphere, she faced the grim reality of her choice. The air grew hotter, the walls of the bridge shuddering as the ship broke apart around her. Alarms blared, their shrill tones a chaotic symphony of impending doom. Elara's breath came in shallow gasps, her hands gripping the console as she fought to maintain her composure. She had known this might be the price, but the weight of it pressed down on her now, heavier than ever. The ship lurched violently, and she was thrown to the floor, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the corridors. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. But then, a familiar warmth filled the room. The air seemed to hum with energy, and when she opened her eyes, the entity was there, its shimmering form pulsing gently in the dim light. "You have done what others could not," it said, its voice a resonant echo in her mind. "But your journey is not over. I can save you, if you agree to help me." Elara stared at it, her heart racing. "Help you how?" she asked, her voice trembling. The entity's light intensified, its energy swirling around her like a protective cocoon. "My kind is scattered, lost across the stars. We need a new home, a place to rebuild. You have proven your strength, your courage. Help me find it, and I will ensure your survival." The words hung in the air, the weight of the offer sinking in. Elara's mind raced. To save herself, she would have to commit to a journey far greater than anything she had faced before. But the alternative was unthinkable. She nodded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I'll help you." The entity's light surged, its energy enveloping the ship as it fought to stabilize the failing systems. The descent slowed, the ship's trajectory shifting just enough to avoid complete destruction. Elara scrambled to her feet, her hands flying across the console as she worked to guide the ship toward a controlled re-entry. The entity's energy pulsed in time with her movements, its presence a constant, reassuring hum. The ship broke through the atmosphere, its hull glowing red-hot as it streaked across the sky. Below, rescue teams scrambled to track its trajectory, their efforts fueled by the distress signal Elara had sent. The ship crash landed in a remote desert, its impact sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. Elara was thrown from her seat, the world dissolving into darkness as she lost consciousness. When she awoke, she was surrounded by the faces of her crew, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. They had been rescued, their safe return a testament to her sacrifice. News of their survival spread quickly, and Elara was hailed as a hero, a title she accepted with quiet humility. But as she stood before the cameras and the crowds, her thoughts were elsewhere. The entity's presence lingered in her mind, its energy a faint but constant reminder of the promise she had made. The journey had changed her in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. She had faced the void, stared into the abyss, and emerged not unscathed, but stronger. The crew's trust in her had been restored, their bond forged anew in the fires of adversity. But as she looked to the stars, she knew her journey was far from over. The entity's plea echoed in her thoughts, a call to action she couldn't ignore. The universe was vast, its mysteries endless, and Elara Voss was ready to explore them not just for herself, but for the future of all who call the stars their home. The moment Alara stepped onto Earth's surface, the weight of her journey seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet, profound relief. The air smelled different here, familiar, grounding, alive. The rescue teams had been waiting, their faces a blur of concern and awe as they rushed to her side. But her attention was drawn to a figure standing slightly apart, leaning on a cane but steady, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and disbelief. Her father, the man she had left behind, frail and fading, now stood before her, his recovery nothing short of miraculous. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the distance between them dissolving in a silent, unspoken understanding. Then he smiled, a small, weary smile that spoke volumes, and she rushed into his arms, the years of guilt and longing melting away. The reunion was more than personal, it was symbolic. Her father's recovery mirrored her own healing, a testament to resilience and the power of second chances. As they embraced, the crew watched from a distance, their faces softened by the weight of what they had all endured. The journey had changed them, but it had also brought them back to where they belonged. For Alara, it was a moment of closure, a chance to let go of the past and embrace the future. But there was no time to linger in the moment. The knowledge she had brought back from the ancient structure was too important to keep to herself. In the weeks that followed, she presented her findings to the scientific community, her voice steady and authoritative as she revealed the secrets of the alien civilization. The device, the wormhole generator, the cosmic event, it was all laid bare, sparking a wave of excitement and curiosity. Her discoveries ignited a new era of exploration, one fueled by the promise of understanding the universe in ways humanity had never imagined. The world watched in awe as the boundaries of what was possible were redrawn, and Alara found herself at the center of it all, not as a figure of obsession, but as a leader. Yet, even as the world celebrated, Alara felt the absence of the entity. It had been with her since the beginning, a constant presence in the chaos. Its departure was quiet, almost unnoticed, a faint shimmer in the night sky as it disappeared into the stars. But its final words lingered in her mind, a promise whispered in the silence. We will meet again. The entity had given her more than knowledge, it had given her purpose. And though it was gone, she knew its legacy would shape the future in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Rebuilding her life wasn't easy. The scars of her journey ran deep, both seen and unseen. But for the first time in years, she felt free from the guilt that had haunted her, free from the obsession that had driven her. She began to reconnect with the world around her, finding solace in small, ordinary moments. A walk in the park, a quiet conversation with her father, the sound of laughter shared with the crew. These were the things that grounded her, reminding her of what truly mattered. The climax of her journey wasn't just about survival or discovery. It was about growth. She had faced the void and emerged stronger, not just as a scientist, but as a person. The sacrifices she had made no longer felt like burdens. They were part of her story, shaping her into the leader she had become. And as she stood on the edge of a new chapter, she felt a quiet confidence, a readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The universe was vast, its mysteries endless, but Alara was no longer chasing shadows. She had found her place, not just among the stars, but within herself. And as she looked to the horizon, she knew one thing for certain: the journey was far from over. It was just beginning. Alara sat alone on a quiet hilltop, the night sky stretching infinitely above her. The stars, once distant and unknowable, now felt like old friends, each one a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. She had chased the signal across the void, unraveling its mysteries and facing challenges that had tested her in ways she could never have imagined. But as she looked back on it all, she realized something profound. The signal hadn't just been a warning, it had been a call to action, to unity, to protect the fragile beauty of the universe. Her thoughts drifted to the crew of the Deep Space Observatory, to Kyan, to the sacrifices they had all made. They had been strangers once, bound by a mission they barely understood. But through the trials they faced, they had become something more, a family united by a shared purpose. That purpose, she now understood, wasn't just about survival. It was about connection. The ancient civilization that had sent the signal hadn't been trying to save themselves. They had been trying to preserve the future, to ensure that others might learn from their mistakes. And now it was up to Alara and humanity to carry that legacy forward. She stood, brushing the grass from her hands, and turned her gaze to the horizon. The world below was waking, the first light of dawn painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was a new day, a new beginning, and Alara felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within her. She had returned to Earth, not as the same person who had left, but as someone transformed, someone who had seen the vastness of the universe and understood the responsibility that came with it. In the weeks that followed, Alara threw herself into her work with a fervor that surprised even her. She became a voice for unity, urging humanity to look beyond its divisions and see the bigger picture. The cosmos wasn't just a place to explore, it was a shared inheritance, a reminder of how small and interconnected they all were. Her discoveries aboard the Deep Space Observatory became the foundation for a new era of exploration, one driven not by competition, but by collaboration. She spoke at conferences, met with world leaders, and worked tirelessly to build bridges between nations and disciplines. The signal, once a source of fear and uncertainty, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could rise to the occasion. And through it all, Alara never lost sight of what mattered most, the people. She made it a point to visit the families of the crew, to share stories of their bravery, and ensure their sacrifices were never forgotten. These moments, more than any accolade or achievement, gave her work meaning. But even as she dedicated herself to the world, she never stopped looking to the stars. The entity's parting words echoed in her mind, a reminder that the journey was far from over. There were still mysteries to unravel, frontiers to explore, and lessons to learn. And as she stood on the edge of this new chapter, she felt a quiet confidence. She had faced the void and returned, not unscathed, but stronger. The universe had tested her, and she had proven herself equal to the challenge. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alara found herself back on that quiet hilltop. The stars began to emerge, one by one, their light piercing the darkness. She smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had also been beautiful, and as she gazed at the stars, she knew that this was only the beginning. The universe was vast, its mysteries endless, and Alara was ready to explore them, not just for herself, but for all of humanity. The story of the Deep Space Observatory was over, but the story of humanity's journey into the cosmos was just beginning. And as Alara turned to leave, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if in recognition of the hope she carried with her. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. And with leaders like Alara to guide the way, humanity would continue to reach for the stars, united by the belief that together they could achieve the impossible.